So we've got the lovely panel from West Midlands ADASS here with us today. And we're going to be exploring the topic of blamed instead of help, how parents of autistic children face blame when they approach services for support. And that's this evening's topic. Debbie, are you going to explain the next slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, and welcome everybody. It's quite scary having so many people join, but it's also it's really great that so many people are interested in the topic. I suppose that's perhaps an indication of the extent to which parental blame impacts the lives of parents of autistic children and young people. So the primary aim of the webinar this evening is to tell you about a project that we've been working on over the last couple of years about autism and parental blame. So this is just an outline of the session this evening. So we'll do some very brief introductions, give you a little bit of context and background to the study, talk about how we've worked in partnership with parents throughout the project, talk about the methods that we used, and then the key findings and the areas for change that we've recommended in our report. Next slide, please. So there we all are. So I'm Debbie Hollingsworth, as you can see. So I'm an associate with West Midlands ADASS, and I've been one of the co-leads on the project. Bernie, who is also up there, unfortunately, isn't able to be with us this evening, but otherwise she would have been presenting as well. So if I just get the rest of the panel to just introduce themselves briefly, that'd be great. Jane, do you want to go? Sorry.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Debbie. My name's Jane Friswell, and I was a parent participant and still am in the project group, and my day job is working as a special educational needs and disability consultant.
Jason.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Schaub. I'm an academic. It says there at Birmingham University, and I've moved recently to Bristol University, but I'm still an academic. And so I provided the methods and other sorts of contributions in relation to research.
And then I guess by process of elimination, it's me. So hello, everyone. I'm Laura Ferguson. I worked with Debbie on the project, so co-facilitated. So I've got a background in adult social care, and like Debbie, we both have family members who are autistic.
Okay, next slide. Thanks, Lydia. Okay, this is some background, right? So the project started in June 2022. So originally, Laura and I were asked if we could work on this for 6 months. We didn't realise at the time quite how much it was going to take over our lives and quite how much there was going to be to do. But it has been really, really good, really interesting. So originally it was commissioned by NHSE Midlands, and this was in response to complaints from parents. In particular, there were 2 parents who felt that their children had not got the help and support that they needed, and that actually the focus had been on blaming them as parents rather than seeing what support could be offered to their children. And they were very unwilling to let it go, and so really pushed until in the end NHSE Midlands said we'll do a consultation with parents to see what the extent of experience of parental blame are, and that's how we got involved. So WM ADASS was commissioned to do the work, maybe slightly oddly in that it's adult directors of adult social services. However, that has provided a little bit of I think being able to step back from things, so we've been able to look at things very objectively, and we don't have, we're not part of children's services, so I think that's actually been helpful. We've had parent contribution throughout the project. We established an expert by experience advisory group, so that included parents and other professionals, and also parents who are also professionals. So we've had quite a lot of involvement throughout. I think we had 18 members, but there's around a group of 10 committed parents who are still involved in the project. As Jason said, he's provided the academic oversight, which has been really useful, kept us on track, sort of helped rein in our emotions at times. So that's been really good. We have produced the phase 1 findings and what we've called considerations, which are a kind of a set of, I guess, recommendations or, well, I guess things to consider. That was published in November 2024. And we're now sort of going through to phase 2 of the project. But this webinar is really going to focus on what we found out in phase 1. So next slide, please, Lydia. Okay, so this is what we've done so far. We did a systematic literature review, which was really quite intensive and extensive. We conducted an online survey of 685 parents. We've run 2 focus groups, and we've developed 8 key considerations which have identified opportunities to improve experiences. It says parents' experiences. It's experiences for children as well and young people as well as parents. And then we're in the process really of disseminating the report and promoting it. So it's gone out quite widely, so to all the relevant parliamentary select committees, all key MPs, relevant royal colleges, nationally to ADASS, and also the Association of Directors of Children's Services, principal social workers, relevant trade unions and professional organisations with an interest such as National Autistic Society and Sky. Next slide. Yeah, so as I say, we've worked with parents throughout the project. We wanted to make sure that co-production was really embedded within the project and that parents were helping us shape the direction, but also the content of what we were looking at. So that's really been at the heart of what we've done. So I think at this point I'm going to hand over to Jane. I'm not sure because I've got a different side. What's the
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, I think it is me. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Debbie. Co-production has been at the heart of the project, and both as a parent and as a working professional in this wonderful world that we label as SEND. What I can tell parents who have joined us this evening is that there was a real sense of the sharing of power throughout the project, throughout phase 1 of the project. And when I describe that, what I mean by that is that I felt that, and I believe that all parents that working through the project had an equal say in the process of really, gathering the research evidence and undertaking the research. And that's really powerful for a parent to be able to report that I feel as though I've been equally, treated and respected and regarded across the parent group and the wider research group as well. And I think one of the great benefits of the project in terms of that co-production, the range of co-production sort of principles that you've applied to how you've undertaken the work, is that we've been able to include a hugely diverse range of perspectives and skills that have been really brought to the surface through the process of the research, and most notably by parents, those parent representatives that have been working on the project. So consequently, I've learned an enormous amount about other people and about their perspectives, both as autistic parents of autistic children, of non-autistic or neurotypical parents of autistic children and young people. And that's really enabled me to really deepen my respect and value the knowledge that people have brought to the project. And then there's been that sort of real mutual benefit of actually learning more about people that we've got to know through the life of the project, and some of the relationships that we've then gone on to enjoy and gain reciprocal support from in being engaged as a parent agent, if you like. And I think strong connections have started as a result of that. So I think that those are real bonuses, aren't they, of any project where we're working in partnership with parents. So I think I can really feel those co-production principles shining through the work that we've undertaken, and feel that there's real equity, equality, and diversity, which has resulted in a really purposeful piece of work. So I would encourage all those on the call tonight to take a look at the research and read it, you know, and have some time to digest it, because this is truly informed by lived experience of parents and their lives with their children and young people.
Okay, I think, Jason, are you able to?
Yeah, the next slide is mine. So the process that I brought into the project is around how to undertake research well. And the reason that we did it like this was because we wanted to be able to present the findings and argue with policymakers about the fact that they should listen to the things that parents were telling us. So one of the ways to do that is to use what we call really robust research methods. And I hope I'm not teaching anybody how to suck eggs, but that meant that we used the most most rigorous methods we possibly could in order to help with that argument. So we did what's very close to a systematic review in the literature as a way to try to shore up the findings that we knew that we were looking for. And these are some of the findings that came out of that. What's really important here is that these findings, we concentrated on the UK, but much of the evidence comes internationally. And these experiences are found internationally. So this isn't just a British sort of issue. But when we think about what is already known about this, that's already existing in the knowledge base, that parents experience the blame that they receive, and they receive that from multiple sources. And so that blame comes to them from the people around them, so from the community, but also from their family and their wider family, from their friends, and particularly from their professionals. And that can be sometimes the most damaging or the most influential form of the blame that they experience, because of the power and the decisions that professionals make in relation to parents and the family's experiences. Parents talk about the damaging impact of this blame, and they talk about the experience of battling the system and being doubted. And this experience of blame appeared to be universal. Professional blame, when we think about the way that professionals across education, social care, and health, which is the three main areas that we concentrated on, it often manifested in a couple of particular ways. So the first is that the professionals blamed parents as a cause of the child's autistic presentations, which would include behaviors or actions, a whole range of things within that, and suggesting possibly that poor parenting is what caused this. That was the sort of consistent refrain that happened. Professionals that didn't listen or believe parents when they talked about circumstances was also a strong running thread. And then the third, which has a particular resonance for the group that we're talking about, was accusations of either neglect and child neglect that would result in children's social care being involved, or fabricated and induced illness. So that's that acronym FII. And these accusations can be incredibly damaging to a family because of the effect that it has around the amount of services that become involved in a family's life at the point to which those accusations are ascribed to a family or to parents. The last thing that we heard that parents and families were impacted around was about needing to become advocates and a rapid sort of upskilling in their knowledge in order to be able to deal with the system that they felt was making their lives harder. And this means that the parents' engagement with services weren't in seeking support or experiencing support, but instead often oppositional, that they felt that services were making their lives harder without any realistic sort of measure of support. There was limited evidence of professional perspectives of parental blame. So that meant that there was very little in the literature about how professionals understood or were even able to recognize and identify experiences of parental blame for parents of autistic children. And the overwhelming amount of studies that we looked at pretty much exclusively focused on mothers, and that there was very, very little research about fathers and even less about other family members and the influence that they might have or the interaction. And what that means is that we have blind spots in our knowledge base. It doesn't mean that people's experiences differ, but what it does mean is that when we're able to point out things to policymakers and others, that we're not able to talk about a range of experiences of different family members. And that has an implication for the way that services are constructed and a whole range of other things. Lydia, can you move to the next slide, please? So when we look at the survey participants that we've got in relation to this study, just going to wait until Lydia is able to move so I don't start talking about the
Bear with me.
the pie charts without them being there.
Oh, sorry. Oh, it doesn't want to go. 1 second. So I'll go back on for your next one, and then afterwards I'm going to go back one.
Okay.
Gosh, sorry. It's doing 2 different things and I need to figure it out. Right. Oh, sorry. Gone to a different view and now I'll find you back again to control it. Oh my goodness me. Bear with me. I'm going to stop the share and go on one. Bear with me just one moment. I am sorry.
That's all right. You're doing much better than I would have been able to do.
So we're going down to slide the pie chart.
Exactly.
Okay, and I'll come back to the other one in a minute, and it still hasn't done it for me. There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So when you look at these pie charts, what they do is they outline the types of people that we talk to, and we have to categorize people in a variety of ways so that we understand what the types of people that we spoke to. And we collected the survey in 2023. The way that we identified people to take part was that they needed to be the parent or the carer of an autistic child or a young person in England. So those were the sort of parameters that we used. Doesn't mean that there weren't interesting or useful experiences outside of that, but it meant that we needed to sort of put boundaries on who could respond to the survey. We had way more responses than I was expecting. And in my career, it's unusual to get more rather than less participants. So that's a really good thing. I think it also is an indication of the level of emotion connected with this from parents, because people were very keen to be involved. So we had 685 responses. And if we look at the pie chart on the very far left, it describes the types, the family role that the individuals held that looked at this. So 92% were birth mothers. So that's similar to what we would have seen in other forms of research that talked predominantly about mothers. Birth fathers were the next largest group, and that was 5%. Adopted parents were 2%, and then grandparents were 1%. And then when we look at the ethnicity, and this is one of the other things that we often use as a grouping to understand and to see whether that matches the ethnic diversity of whether it's the total population across England or across people that have autistic children. And so what we see here is an overwhelmingly percentage of people that are white or from white backgrounds that responded, and a much smaller from from minority ethnic groups that related to this. So 2% from mixed or multiple ethnic groups, 1% Asian and Asian British, and then 1% Black, Black British Caribbean, or Black African, or Black other. And then the last sort of category to look at is the children that are referred to. And we had 61% were boys, 36% are girls, and then almost 4% that were identified as transgender. And this is consistent with the transgender rates amongst the autistic population, and is something that we were wanting to think about whether that influences experiences of autistic, or parental blame, I should say, is one of the other things. There are a range of other findings that we looked at in some more detail in the report. So if you're interested in sort of going underneath of that or in more detail, you can in the report, if you wouldn't mind. So if you take a look, can I have the next slide, please, Lydia? So when we talked to the focus groups that we had 2 focus groups with a total of 9 people across those. So in addition to the survey, we then wanted to sit in a room and talk to people. And the main question that we asked was of parents of autistic children, when designing support for parents before and after this diagnosis of autism, what would good look like? And what we saw was that people were very interested in participating more, and that the aim of the focus groups was to capture the views of parents of positive experiences of support and to tell us what good might look like. And what we did at the point at which we were undertaking the focus groups was we had an artist who compiled and pulled together the information. There were 2 different groups. So one that were autistic parents of autistic children, and then a second group where the parents were not, they didn't identify as autistic. Next slide, please, Lydia. And these are very, very busy slides, and we're not expecting you to see and notice everything that's in there. But these are the artistic representations that were sort of a graphic record of what was happening during the focus groups. They're able to be viewed and downloaded on the ADASS website, and it'll give you a sense of how people experienced it. We're going to use clips of or very small sort of portions of these when we're talking about the various findings that are coming up in just a second. But just to take a look at those, there are some on the top one, looking at things like being an autistic parent, the pre-diagnostic assessment and the post-diagnostic assessment. And then if you look over here on the left-hand or the right-hand side is things like causing trauma and neurotypical practitioners that get it as a sense of positive. I'm handing over to Laura, who's going to be talking about the overall findings and the 8 consideration areas. And that's the next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Lydia.
Do you want me to go back for Jane's first, or come back to Jane's later? Shall I come back to you, Jane, later? Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'll move on.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason, as well. So really, we just want to draw your attention to the findings. So all the work that's been done to date resulted in us being able to look for themes that were evidenced, and evidence was really important to us in this project. And we came up with 8 key considerations that we were able to pull together evidence from the lit review, the survey, and the focus groups. And here they are all on one page. For the purpose of today, and be able to kind of tell you more about them and give you an overview, we've actually paired them together. So we will be talking you through each of our 8 considerations, but I'm just going to read them out. So, and I'm sure there won't be any surprises, but the important thing here is that the evidence was able to support us to make these statements. Autism is widely misunderstood by professionals. The current support offered is often unhelpful and sometimes does more harm than good. Accusations of blame result in long-term damage, trauma, and risk of suicide. Parents of autistic children have a high level of mistrust in services and professionals. Parents' knowledge of their child is not recognised or valued and may be viewed with suspicion. Parental blame is more likely to occur before a child is diagnosed as autistic. Autistic parents experience more parental blame, and parents of autistic children may be at increased risk of being subject to child protection proceedings and fabricated induced illness. So if we could move on to the next slide, we can just explore this in a little bit more detail. So we've grouped this as misunderstanding can cause harm. We were able to evidence that autism is widely misunderstood by professionals. We were able to demonstrate through the numbers and through the feedback of parents that quite often parents were looking at behaviours of children as opposed to perplexing presentations and making judgments and misunderstanding the behaviour of the child and not linking that as the child being autistic. The current support offered to parents is often unhelpful and sometimes does more harm than good. An example of this can be parenting classes. So many parents told us that parenting classes, in fact, 20% of parents told us they weren't interested in parenting classes. They were value laden and made parents feel judged. They felt it was another hoop to jump through. They were aimed at neurotypical children, and personalised approaches weren't used for autistic children. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Jane, and Jane's going to talk us through the next slide.
Thanks, Laura. What we found in our work together was that often those of us that had received a prescription, if you like, of training, was that there was very much a neurotypical model of parenting training and support that was being provided, as Laura described earlier. And there was a real lack in our lived experience of support and training and information being provided by experts by experience, really. And I think, you know, as a parent, not just involved in the project, but generally in my lived experience as a parent, is that who would want to overlook that massive capital gain that we bring as parents? And generally speaking, there was this real sense that there was a lack of investment in the relational support and relational interest in families, in parents, in children, from professionals. So that really had quite a harming effect on leading us in some of our experiences as parents to developing almost a culture of mistrust, of not receiving an adequate investment. And of course, there are huge barriers to that. There's the massive barrier of professionals having access to adequate time, having access to adequate training. That requires a real insightful approach in their practice. But we felt as parents that there were specific gaps in our lived experience in how this misunderstanding can cause harm. And to address that, you know, we would like to see from our What Good Looks Like points here is autism training for professionals that particularly focuses on those 4 key points there. You know, as a professional and an educator who has taken a long-term interest in the support for girls who are autistic, you know, this whole notion and area of masking and masking behaviours. And I think also that training underpinning the message that actually, if you've met one autistic child or young person or parent, you've just met one. And the notion of us having to be really flexible as professionals in our understanding, and to an extent being led by parents, and wanting to really value and respect as I say, that capital, that family insight and lived experience, to add value to the building of really strong relationships over time. Thanks, Lydia. I'm handing back to Laura, I think.
Thank you. So the next groupings were around blame from professionals can lead to trauma and mistrust. So our project revealed the consequences of parental blame are damaging to both children and their families. And this damage continues. So it's no wonder that poor experiences lead to parents not wanting to reach out for support in the future, worried about how their views of their child will be interpreted. Parents told us that some of them developed symptoms of PTSD. It had a big impact on their health and their well-being, as well as the health and well-being of their children. 68% told us they felt isolated. And also parents were really concerned that even after they'd fought to demonstrate that they weren't doing anything wrong, there was no accountability for professionals. There felt like a real power imbalance between the professional and the parent. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So here's some of the statistics and some of the findings. 1 in 4 parents reported their child had been at high risk of suicide following parental blame. So it wasn't just the parent that didn't feel believed, but the child as well. And the child quite often developed negative associations with autism instead of lots of the positive ones that are there. It also revealed a third of parents were feared that their child might be removed from their care. And again, loss of trust in services. 3/4 of parents told us that they lost trust in services. We found
Laura, I was just going to drop in a point really that I know Bernie can't be with us tonight, but she and I talked a lot about the tactic of parental blame is almost used to move accountability away from the professionals and the professional role, and to almost shift the scrutiny onto parents. And I think that's a really important point to make as a parent, and also on behalf of Bernie, because that can be incredibly distressing to families. And I think, you know, given the high incidence of autistic parents engaging with our research, parents suggest that they're really easy to discredit, you know, and I think that's a really important point that has been captured through some of the responses of the survey, you know, those more than 600 parents that have responded to that. So there's an element here which for me as a parent says that parent blaming is actually a human rights issue. You know, I feel very strongly about this, because it contravenes in some cases disability discrimination and some of the equality duties that operate under current legislation. And I know this was a particular point that Bernie felt really strongly about, because, you know, treating someone less favourably because they are working to advocate for someone with a disability is classed as disability discrimination, and that needs bringing really to the fore through our research, and is a bit of a standard bearer in a way for some of the changes around what good looks like in holding people to better account.
Thanks, Jane. And I think that's a really good kind of segue into I mean, the findings were that 1/3 of parents experienced blame after they'd made a complaint. You know, that they're often described as a trigger, and yet parents were seeking to advocate on behalf of their children, to challenge to get the best of their children for their children, and that was perceived they were meeting barriers, and then they needed to make a complaint in order to pursue. And I think that's a really sad account, really, isn't it? But it does describe the process that many parents felt that they were on, and that complaint was a real trigger for them. So I think we're moving on to the next slide, and back to you, Jane.
So when we're talking about, what good looks like, blame and poor support seems to sort of go hand in hand from the experiences that the research has captured. And particularly in many of the parents' experiences, and Jason talked about this earlier, that often parental blame was being experienced prior to any diagnostic experience that a family has encountered. Of the parents that we spoke to, none had received any support for themselves or their child to address the damaging impact of parental blame by professionals. And in addition to that, there was no process for professionals when they got it wrong. So that harks back to the point that I was making earlier around lack of accountability and subsequent consequence as well. So, there's this whole notion of questions being left by the research around false and unsubstantiated accusations, and the level of investigation that should lead us to a place that actually we learn from. So, what are the learnings that we can take place from when we look at situations where things have not gone so well, and there is evidence of that deliberate falsification, because there are at the root of some of the really, really difficult and damaging experience for some parents, lies are being told about their children and their families, and it simply is a travesty of justice, effectively, for those parents that have encountered that experience. I think I'm handing back to Debbie.
And get the mute button. Right, thank you, Jane. Okay, so we also found that parents' knowledge and expertise is disregarded, and I think we've kind of touched on this already. So parents told us they felt there was a power imbalance between themselves and professionals, that their observations and thoughts about their child were often dismissed, with professionals seeing themselves as the experts and questioning or querying what parents were saying. So that knowledge isn't recognised or valued, and it can often be viewed with suspicion. So parents told us that when they knew about their child's autism, when they understood it, when they explained that to professionals, when they were seen as being, experts by experience, that actually that was in itself was viewed as being suspicious, that they knew too much and therefore could potentially be making it up because their knowledge was too great. And we also found that parental blame was more likely to occur before a child is diagnosed as autistic. So for most parents, there was an improvement after a diagnosis, but not entirely. So can we just go on to the next slide, Lydia, please, and then. It's fine. Take your time.
We can when it wants to let me. Bear with me just 1 second. There we go.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so over 80% of parents said they weren't believed about their child's autistic presentation when they spoke to professionals, and that their parenting was criticised before they had a formal autism diagnosis. So Mostly that was through education services, through school particularly, also health. But still, as I think we've said, we saw this in the literature review, that blame also came from friends and family and from parents blaming themselves as well. The number is slightly lower for social care, but I imagine that might be because social care often were involved sort of later down the line, not as one of the sort of first services that parents come into contact with. And as we've said, an autism diagnosis improves the incidence of parental blame across all sectors, but it doesn't eliminate it. So a quarter of parents said blame from education professionals worsened after the child's diagnosis, that they were more in conflict then at that point. And parents experienced the biggest reduction in blame from their partner, their friends, and family. I think, and then Jane, if you're going to just sort of talk about what good could look like regarding this.
Yes, thanks, Debbie. It would be really useful, wouldn't it? You know, when I was reflecting on the principles of co-production that have informed and really been embedded at the heart of the research that Laura, Debbie and Jason have led on. If we could really see those principles alive and kicking in some form of working agreement between parents and professionals based on that mutual respect that I referred to earlier. But importantly, recognising, you know, our strengths as parents in that partnership and what we bring to the partnership is real. I talked about, you know, why any working professional in this particular regard would want to ignore the valued capital that parents bring to the partnership is beyond me. Because I know as a teacher, as an educator, as a former head teacher, you know, without families and the wealth of information that they bring to actually piecing our relationship and building it over time, I would have been at a complete and utter loss. You know, I wouldn't have been able to have done the job that I was doing at the time to the best of my ability. So I think something like a working agreement would be a wonderful step forward in terms of really trying to secure the knowledge and expertise that parents have and can bring to the partnership. I think parents' concerns have to be taken seriously, and I'm not sure, you know, I was really taken seriously before my son was probably the age of 8 or 9. And yet we identified as parents that we were going to have a very interesting journey with him developmentally from about the age of 15 months. So for that period of his life, we were sort of a little bit flailing. And although, you know, the job that I do and I've been doing over the last 40 years should put me in the best possible position, I often reflected during those very difficult and challenging times in his life, you know, if I'm reasonably and pretty well informed about what services and supports are available within my local area and how to navigate the system, then where are parents who are really struggling with that? You know, who's supporting them? So adopting that sort of culture where we're looking at really listening to what parents are saying that they need and require. I can remember being involved in the development of our local offer, you know, this local directory of services in our local area. And the key question that I needed the local offer to answer at the time was that I wanted to know where my local autism-friendly hairdresser was, because my son did not like having his hair cut. I wasn't that bothered about anything else on the local offer. That's what I needed at the time. And did it provide that? No, it didn't. You know, so I think this is about listening, developing that culture of listening and respect to parents, coupled with professionals really being tooled and trained up to offer that non-judgmental approach. And that's a big ask of professionals. So they're going to need support, training, information and exposure to challenging circumstances where their perceptions of us as parents need to be challenged within that culture of listening and respect. And then practitioners, how well do they know about the wide range of organisations, largely sitting within the third sector, that provide a range of valuable resources and advice to parents? How many hours have you spent Googling stuff? You know, still trying to find your way to find that, you know, that sort of golden piece of information that might just tackle the current challenge or the challenges that you perceive that your children are going to face in the future. So, you know, that's some of the features of what good would look like that parents said to us and shared with us throughout the research. Handing back to Debbie.
Thank you. Next slide, Lydia. Thank you. So some of the other themes that came out of the work that we did was around safeguarding, FII, and how that impacted around autism. So the two sort of key considerations around this is that parents of autistic children are at increased risk of child protection proceedings and or suspected of fabricated induced illness. And parents who themselves are autistic are more likely to experience parental blame than other parents. So if we just move on to the next slide, Lydia, and then we can have a look at some of these figures. So 1 in 4 parents across the board, so everybody responding in our survey, 1 in 4 parents were subject to a safeguarding referral. And approximately 1 in 6 were accused of fabricating or inducing illness. So that is more likely to be actually fabricating autism, so actually making up the symptoms of autism, or sort of like misreporting their child's autistic presentation. Parents who themselves had a formal diagnosis of autism were 3 times more likely to be accused of FII and to have their children removed and taken from their care. So about a third of our survey participants identified as autistic. I think a third of those actually had a formal diagnosis, and so, sorry, I'm getting myself confused now. So 31% of formally diagnosed autistic parents were accused of FII. That was compared to 21% of parents who self-identified as autistic, but who hadn't gone through the formal assessment process, and 11% of parents who were either not autistic or who weren't sure. So I think we were able to say fairly confidently that what we'd found was that parents with a formal diagnosis of autism were 3 times more likely to be accused of FII, which is, I think that's probably quite staggering, really. So I think, Jane, do you want? Sorry, I'm confusing you, Lydia. So yes, I think we found this quite a sort of a significant finding, really, and definitely that sort of speaks to the fact that we need to sort of question, really, what's happening in these interactions with professionals. Why is it that autistic parents are 3 times more likely to be accused of FII, 3 times more likely to have their children removed from their care, as other parents who are also experiencing parental blame? So it's not just compared to any other parents, it's all parents who experience parental blame. But the parents we worked with through the focus groups had some recommendations about what could be done to make this situation better. Thank you, Lydia.
Thanks, Lydia. Thanks, Debbie. So on behalf of Bernie, really, who's not able to be with us tonight, you know, what she would say if she were here this evening is that professionals absolutely need to start from that point of believing us, believing parents, and that we need to be seeing much more of a specialised workforce response, particularly when undertaking assessments of need of our children and young people. But in order to do that, they've got to receive, training in or have experience in autism, and we would welcome an autistic workforce in this regard. It'd be phenomenal if we could have some autistic members of staff in that whole assessment of need cycle, because we believe as parents that they would then be able to conduct assessments which places the child at the centre and recognises the family's expertise. But of course, we've got to equip our practitioners to be able to recognise and work with a whole range of autistic adults, but also with our children too. So, being trained in how to adapt their communication styles and approaches, making those reasonable adjustments in reference to some of the disability and equality duties that I mentioned earlier, and how to make procedures and practices just much more accessible would be welcomed. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. I just don't seem to be able to remember to do that, do I? The next slide, please. Thank you. Right, so that I'm sorry that is a real sort of whistle-stop tour of what we've found through the work that we've done so far. So that formed phase 1 of our work, and we're kind of moving into phase 2. So this is just a little kind of run through of what we're doing next. So we are delivering some webinars for parents and professionals. So we wanted to prioritise sharing the findings with parents first. So you have kind of all been guinea pigs this evening. Actually, it would be really good if you're happy to share some feedback, perhaps with Lydia, about things that you think maybe we could have touched on more or didn't cover enough, and that would be great. And we're going to be running some webinars for professionals a bit later. We are going to be conducting a consultation with professionals through an online survey and focus groups, and that's going to really be looking at, sort of what I think we've got sufficient evidence really that actually parents are experiencing parental blame when they engage with professionals, but we want to know what's happening for professionals. What do they think is going on in those encounters? Then we're going to report on the findings as a whole and identify further opportunities to improve parents' and children's experiences, developing recommendations, and then producing a final report towards the end of 2025, and looking for other ways that we can share what we've found. I think we've got another slide. Video, if you could move on. Okay. Yeah, so this is just where you can get more information, and really it was just a bit of an ask about sort of what you can do. So you can sign up to our mailing list. There's a little video about the project, including interviews with some parents who were involved. You can download the reports and the literature review and share the messages. So we've distributed it quite widely, but obviously the more that we can get it out there and the more of a conversation that we can sort of generate, I think the better that is. So I think that is everything. Have I covered everything? I'm looking at my co-presenters for some thoughts. Okay. I'm going to hand back to Lydia and then.
Lovely, thank you. I've got a few, I can see them popping up, but I can't look at them while I was doing the slides. I've got, now 24 comments in the chat, so I'm going to go and have a look at those and read some out. Whilst I do that, once I've got a header reading them out, I'm going to copy and paste your link into the chat function as well to send them to everybody, so they can get that as well. Let me just start at the beginning. Whoever said they hate tech, thank you very much. So we've had a question: will the report be shared with local authorities at the case officer stroke senior case officer level? 70% of EHCPs, etc., including autism as a need, and yet autism does not seem to be understood still. Also, it sits nicely with the Oliver McGowan training in learning disability and autism, and he plans to include research findings in this mandatory training, thinking especially of how to target CAMS staff.
So can I come back on that one? So in regard to the latter, one of our advisory group members actually delivers the Oliver McGowan training and has incorporated that into their delivery and has shared that wider as well. So yes, I mean, and I think the earlier in the webinar, Debbie described some of the many organisations that we've reached out to, including directors of children's services, and we are trying to get this under the nose of children's services to ensure that at the local authority level. But it's not just us, we're also connecting with other researchers in this area that are working around this topic. And there is a kind of growing strategy around how to do that. And I think it's interesting that it is becoming more talked about, more recognised. But I think we're at the start of a long journey on that one.
Can I just also add to that, Lydia, please, that I think it's incumbent on all of us, but particularly parents, that we raise this within our local area. I work with a number of different local areas across England, and this research has all hit the local area. So the local parent carer forums are being made aware about it. The local SEND executive boards and local area partnership boards and ICBs are on. All of this information is starting to filter down. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to ask, well, what difference is it going to make at local level? Where are you going to take the information of what good looks like, by the end of this phase of research, and how can we take the learnings of this research and the considerations or / recommendations and build that in to the existing culture of how we operate and how we relate positively with parents, particularly autistic parents of autistic children. So because we know that, I mean, quite frankly, this type of behaviour and experiences of parents simply needs calling out. This is an attempt, the research is an attempt to actually try and flip this narrative and to really, I suppose, rail against parental blame as being culturally toxic, because that's what it is. We've got to treat it that way, and we've got to understand it that way. So there are no winners in operating a culturally sort of toxic environment in which we invite parents of children who are autistic into. So there are absolutely no winners. And we've got to stop talking about relationships with parents of autistic children in terms of, operating from an I'm right as the professional and you're wrong. That power base has to shift completely. And we can only do that together by mobilising local voices, using research evidence shared this evening to start to influence change at local level.
Thank you, Jane. I'm just going through all the messages. So we've got some, I know we spoke before everyone arrived, and I would say the same with anything in the chat, that we've very specifically have been sent some quite personal, would we say, Debbie? We've had some, and Laura, we spoke about having some private questions come in, and that we're not able to sort of talk about individual situations within the forum, and I think we spoke about that, didn't we, beforehand? So we have had some questions about solicitors and within the chat. I think one question that might be useful is, will there be information from yourselves that people will be able to use within, say, court proceedings, supportive information from your reports even?
So I think, I mean, the report is as it stands, and it can be used, you know, it's publicly available, and we would encourage people to download it and to share it and to use that information. So I think in terms of changing national policy, that might take some time. But as Laura said, there is a gathering sort of a growing group of people who are interested, passionate about this subject, doing further research. And the more evidence that is gathered, the wider that evidence that we can produce, the greater the pressure that we can put on policymakers and decision makers in order to shift things. So I think in terms of, I think you alluded to like sort of personal questions that you know, and we've had, and I think this is one of the things that Laura and I felt were really sort of humbled by. I mean, particularly through the survey that we did, we had 685 people responding, and we had a lot of opportunity for people to like just write freely and share their experiences. And so we've had a huge amount of information from people about their personal stories, all of which have been, you know, very challenging, obviously for them, also challenging to read about. And we're not able, you know, we're not claiming to be experts in this. We've come at this, you know, sort of from different backgrounds, and as parents of autistic children. So we're not able to advise people individually, but we are going to put a list of possible organisations and places where people could go for additional support if that was helpful to people. I think we were meeting with a group of academics and professionals and solicitors just a couple of weeks ago, and talking about perhaps getting together a checklist for parents, so which we think would be really helpful. So actually kind of like from sort of legal points that people can raise, and things that they should be doing, sort of at what point can you involve a solicitor and things like that, so that actually parents are better equipped, particularly if they're in the circumstances of having accusations of FII levelled against them, or going through child protection. Sorry, is that?
No, thank you, Debbie. Yeah, absolutely. And coming from sort of peer support, that, you know, knowing that this kind of information people need, that personally think that sounds like it would probably be really useful. We've had some people sort of making comment on for instance, misunderstanding who cause harm slide even. This point is key, as the government keep talking about early intervention, but that will only work if parents are believed, especially those parenting children with hidden disabilities, PDA, masking and fawning behaviours. Was one of the comments that we've had. Also, somebody's sort of stated that they've doubted whether or not they've got an illness, and it's them rather than their son just being, not just, but being autistic. So that's, these, you know, like you said about those stories coming through, they're definitely here in the chat as well. Did the research take into consideration, this is probably for you, Jason, coexisting of other ND conditions such as ADHD?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. Anybody else on the panel, raise your hand and shout at me if you think I've got it incorrect. But in short, we didn't look at other elements of neurodiversity. And the reason that we didn't do that was because we needed to put parameters on what we could look at. It doesn't mean that there weren't participants in the studies that we reviewed and the literature reviewed that didn't have other elements of neurodiversity, but that wasn't a focus and wasn't something that would either allow them to participate or exclude them either way. And the same thing for the focus groups that we had. There were parents that had a range of neurodiversity, but that didn't necessarily mean that that was the question or the thing that we were looking for. So there was no exclusionary sort of categorizations around things like that at all.
Amazing. Thank you, Jason. Jane, I don't know which point it was, but you got a spot on, Jane. So thank you for that comment wherever you were in there.
Lydia, can I just say, I'm just reflecting on what Debbie was saying about the checklist for parents. And I think maybe one of the reflection points for us as parents is to think, actually what works for us in terms of how best to communicate with us about our children and young people, and to be really clear about that with those that we are communicating with about our children and young people. So there are, there are very many sort of practical implications these days, when you're a working parent or just simply a flipping busy parent, all that goes on in our children's lives that requires our intervention and support and leadership. So I think there's something about, what works best for me as a parent when communicating with me. And then that leads to a conversation, which should lead to a conversation with any professional that you're dealing with, that says, does that work well for you? So, and if it doesn't, then let's talk about those particular facets or features of how we can communicate effectively. And I've always said that the best way to contact me is either via text or email. I'm not great at phone calls, so these are the things where if I can peg things in my life with others that I'm working with and talking to, I find them really, really good anchors at times, particularly during the challenging times. So I think maybe just having that profile of yourself and being really clear about that with others.
I wonder if we would encourage people to find the way our children prefer the communication, but we forget
absolutely
that, like trying
absolutely yeah.
Somebody else has said, simply asking how we can help could be a good start if professionals were to ask parents how they can help, which is great. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to read and speak and everything else. So somebody's sorry, I'm trying. Somebody said, what appetite is there for professionals to change their practice? And queries in being entrenched in services and certain professions, and as not as simple as training. So what do we do then?
Yeah, sorry, can I come back on that one, folks, if that's okay? I think you're right. I think there's a cultural level of change that's required, which can take a long time, to shift. But I think for me, it begins with the practice of almost professional humility and reflection. And I think we're getting much better at developing and supporting and nurturing practitioner reflection and practice, reflective practice in all walks of life, in education, health and social care. But again, I come back to the point I made earlier. When you've met one parent of an autistic child, you've just met one parent. So I think there's a need for us to think about how can we almost create a really positive sort of immersive set of experiences for practitioners to better understand and appreciate positive difference and diversity of the needs of parents of autistic children and young people. And that requires really, really strong, fresh, bold leadership. It requires flipping hard work to bring the balance back into how we support families, but I think particularly families of children who are autistic, because on the back of that, the believing or the believability factor in that relationship will strengthen over time, and opportunities to better understand parents and young people and respect them as an equal partner in the relationship will develop, in that way, by having that culture, removing the toxic or the toxicity. I remember quite vividly, Lydia, my son's now nearly 24. So this is nearly 20 years ago, when he was 4, that he was being described as evil as a 4-year-old child by his then reception teacher, who, sadly wasn't early years informed or trained, hadn't got an awful lot of experience or understanding of what having a special educational need looked like, certainly had very, very limited experience of teaching children with autism. But of course, that lit that blue touch paper, in my soul as a parent, for my child to even be labelled in that way, let alone thought of in that way. So my urge to pin said teacher against the wall had to be suppressed. And as an educator, I had to take the professional view as a parent, which was incredibly hard at the time, to educate her. And that's how I learned that she genuinely didn't have a clue. She genuinely didn't have a clue. So I think just because we put a badge of teacher on an individual and they are operating in that professional capacity doesn't then mean that they're qualified to deal with all that they have to manage at classroom level. So our perception of those that are occupying that professional role sometimes gets a little bit skewed too. So we've got to find out more. We've got to ask questions as parents, and we've got to say, have you, what's your experience of actually teaching and supporting and meeting the needs of children like my child? Tell me what the challenges look like for you, because I can tell you what it's like back at home and what works for us back at home in the family context. Maybe trying some of those ways and means is going to work within a classroom setup. But that's where you then start to learn, don't you? You start to learn about what works and what the positive ways forward are. And importantly, what doesn't work. Because often what we can end up doing in schools, in clinics, in social care settings, is invest masses and masses of resources of doing the same flipping thing over and over again, which of course, as we all know, is the equivalent of, and not seeing any change in outcomes, because of course that then leads us to think that is complete madness. So we've got to start to sort of find what works and shape and reshape and for individuals, and that's tricky. It really is tricky.
Yeah.
And if I could just add, because I mean, I think we mustn't underestimate the power of evidence. So what we've been able to, you look through the report in more detail, you will find a compelling evidence base really for supporting some of the things that you're going through. I mean, just to say, 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 parents were telling us that they were accused of FII. That those numbers don't stack up in terms of the general population. It's a really, really rare thing. So actually this evidence base, use this as your tool to challenge. The report is a tool in itself. And on the aspect of professionals, Debbie described that we'll be working with professionals and kind of teasing out some further issues. I think it's interesting that we started this as a 6-month project back in 22, and it's like an onion with lots of layers, isn't it? But that is an area that we want to explore in more detail. That's definitely one of the findings.
I love that. It's definitely like an onion, isn't it? For sure. And we've had I'm trying to some of you have asked questions to not to be read out, but about contact and stuff, so I'm just replying to those at the same time as well. So So people are concerned about sort of triggering backlash by even challenging professionals, no matter how correct or politely, can trigger backlash or allegations. Somebody's asked, is it possible, how is it possible for SENCOs to have no compulsory training in understanding of autism?
Well, sorry, I'll come back at that one, Lydia. I think actually we need to go further back than that. That's around the needs of initial teacher trainees, you know, and just sadly how poor our tooling up and development offer is for initial teacher trainees in certainly in England and across probably across the rest of the UK actually. It simply isn't good enough. So you know, if you're not ready and prepared, and you're not approaching teaching with the professional mindset of still remaining open. You know, we ask a lot of our teachers at classroom level when we talk about, you know, a teacher is a teacher of everyone, you know, and that's how we promote our inclusive offer of provision and support, particularly within our mainstream schools. But actually, at the sharp end, if you're the teacher, then you've got to have a range of different skills and abilities and insights that enables you to identify needs early, to have those important conversations with children, parents, other professionals, usually the school SENCO, to enable you to start to build that scaffold of early intervention and support as and when it's required by a child, by a learner. And SENCOs, I mean, I have to say, I am so in awe of our SENCOs in our schools. They are doing an amazing job under increasingly challenging circumstances. So I think whilst the compulsory element of the autism training, you will find that there aren't that many SENCOs across England that haven't undertaken the Autism Education Trust training, that aren't Autism Education Trust leaders in training. And that's at a significant local level of leadership where they're training other SENCOs and training other classroom practitioners as well. So I think we'd be really hard pressed to find a SENCO in any mainstream school nowadays where they haven't received some form of specialised training in autism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's come back. I'm just going up. I think somebody said about finding it difficult for some people to access that training. Sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. I'll go on to another one and I'll try to find where that came from. But did the panel look at financial implications being a reason that professionals adopt an aggressive or defensive stance with parents?
When you say financial, do you mean resources?
Yeah, they're all cash strapped and
Okay.
cannot afford to help all young people, was the rest of that line. So did we find that that was something that impacted?
So that wasn't something that we explored. So we haven't. What we've done to date is look at the experiences of parents, and kind of how the responses that they've had from professionals. So we haven't looked at the reasons or the drivers behind parental blame, but that should come in our next in the next phase when we're working with professionals. So I think that is one of the things we want to explore with them. So what is happening when a parent experiences that interaction as parental blame? What's going on for the professional? You know, are they conscious that actually they can't provide the service, that this is just one more person who, you know, and they don't have the resources to be able to do that? Or is there something on a deeper cultural level maybe where actually, you know, we still as a society hold parents accountable for the actions of their children, and we still see autistic presentation as a negative thing, so we're kind of viewing it as something, you know, undesirable, and that's why professionals are kind of you know, sort of blaming parents for what they see as being sort of undesirable behaviour. So I think hopefully we'll get more into what's driving parental blame as we go through the second phase of the project.
Thank you. Yeah, there's just so much you could do, isn't there? You can just get.
I think this is the thing, and this is what we really need to be able to do in the second half and this is where Jason has been so valuable, as helping us narrow down those questions. So you can't answer all of the questions. You can ask them all, but you're not going to be able to answer them all. So actually, you need to really work out what's the most critical question that we want answered. What's going to give us the kind of, you know, the best results, really. And I think we're still honing that really in terms of what we're going to ask professionals, you know, sort of actually working out what are the critical questions we want to ask, because otherwise we could spend a lot of time asking people things that are interesting but don't actually further our knowledge particularly, or move us forward in terms of arriving at some recommendations that would make a real difference to parents and children.
And I think that's a really lovely point to sort of say at the end there. There's several questions here, as I sort of alluded to earlier, where people are asking for suggestions of how parents can successfully challenge LAs, and, you know, lots of things along that way. And from what you're saying and what we've sort of come back and forth with is that we've got more to come. There's more phases that we've got to go through, and the idea is that hopefully by the end of that we'll have some way to inform future steps.
Yes, I think so. But obviously some parents are going through those
right now,
you know, through those challenges right now. And as I say, we'll try and get some resources and be able to, you know, sort of signpost people through the ADASS website. So there are, you know, some organisations who can help. There are peer advocacy organisations who will be able to provide more help and support. It's not something that Laura and I have the capacity or the expertise to do, really. But I mean, we were talking about it earlier, and I was just saying that in my sort of I've worked as an advocate for learning disabled parents going through child protection and care proceedings, and I've always found that actually it's really powerful having somebody else in the room with you. And so if you're in those really tricky situations, perhaps having somebody that you can take with you, who isn't, you know, necessarily adversarial, but actually then don't even necessarily have to say anything, but just having the presence of somebody else there can actually change the direction of the narrative. And also, you know, just gathering that if you feel that you're being stonewalled or that you're not getting somewhere, that actually just keeping an audit trail of all of the communication that you have, just, you know, sort of is helpful, really. As I say, we're not equipped to be able to deal with people's queries individually, but if we can get some resources that, you know, that we can signpost people to for organisations who may be able to help them, we'll do that.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. And you know, I think it is, every individual case is so different as well, isn't it, that you would be, you know, no one person could do that. So yeah, that's fantastic, is to be able to share that information. And just to go back to that last slide, I've sent everyone the link that you put on there, and is that a useful place for them to go look at your site? Is that where this information for signposting will come when we've got it together?
Yeah, there's one page on the ADASS website. That link or the QR code takes you there. Alternatively, if you just Google autism and parental blame, I think that will actually take you to the page on the ADASS website. there's a short video, there's much more detail around the stages of the project, and then the overarching report as well. And we will post information on there. There's also an email address where you can request that we add you to our email grouping. So any updates, you'll get a kind of ping in your inbox that says there's new information on the website. So take a look on that web page, read the information, and follow the links if you want to add your name to the mailing list.
Amazing, thank you. And I have just literally Googled it, because sometimes it's not always the first thing that pops up, is it? And it does, you are literally at the top of that list. So as soon as it comes up, it takes you straight to your research page. So there you go.
Up.
That's amazing. And there we are. I could probably go on forever and ever. I think I don't think I'm missing anything that isn't quite an individual situation. So I think it's probably a good point to wrap up here. And sort of say that I think we'll look out for excitedly for the next part. Because I think it's going to be really interesting to see the next phase as we go along. There will be a recording of this. It has been recorded, and that will be out. Anything else anybody's got to say from the panel?
Just thank you for hosting, Lydia, and thanks for, parents and others attending this evening. It's been great to have so many show interest, and obviously we would encourage and direct everybody to the WM ADASS site, as Debbie and Laura have reminded us about this evening. So thank you.
Yeah, just to echo that, thanks for everybody's participation, because without the huge number of people that responded, that wouldn't have given us the information to produce the evidence to date. So thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. I shall yeah, there we go. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll finish here.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.